In a tabletop role-playing game, the worst thing a magic item can be is boring. True, most of the games I run are low or no magic, so even the simplest magic item can be life-changing. However, in many fantasy settings, it's like there's a gnome sweatshop churning them out somewhere, and they tend to be very pedestrian, so unless something is specifically world-shattering, nothing really stands out. This is why I enjoyed going through Trek's Treasure Trove. 60 magic items for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. This book is now available from DriveThru RPG and really gives you two tools. The first one is a set of magic items which are actually interesting. There are a couple of artifacts in here, but the lower power ones are things that your players would have a blast messing around with. And I don't mean explosions. Mostly. The other tool here is a taxonomy for magic items. Trek is a great game designer and does stuff like this all the time. We will get back to it later, but I found this very useful as a way to think of why we give items to players, and we'll probably be using this when designing items in the future. One great thing about these items is that interesting does not care what system you're playing. Sure, they're written for 5e, but because they favor effect over mechanics, you can drop most of them into whatever system you're running without having to change a thing. Take an instigator's biography, for example. Your player studies it for an hour, and they become aware of the closest 3 strangers who are most likely to help them. Terms and conditions apply. Drop that into EZD6 or Call of Cthulhu, and it's good to go, no changes required. Some items do have rules which are system dependent. For example, there's the Sheet of Demise, which is essentially a one-page death note. You write a name on the sheet, and the creature dies if it has less than 100 hit points. Then the sheet disappears and it magically pops up among the belongings of someone who was tied with the last target. Sensible games don't have hit points running into triple digits, so if I was to run this in EZD6, I'd replace the hit point limit with a sudden death save. For Call of Cthulhu, I just say that the target dies if it's mortal, and maybe throw in some sanity loss if the target is not mortal. It does get a bit trickier with systems that use different concepts of health, such as White Wolf's Mage or Exalted. But if you are familiar with the system, you should be able to find a suitable analog or just remove the restriction entirely, because it does not matter as much in some games. But now let's have a look at the product itself. Trek's Treasure Trove is produced by Trekiros, with contributions from other designers including Val from Corkboards and Curiosities, and Leo from Planar Express. Special shout out to my boy Salty Nick. The items he wrote for this book are his first published tabletop RPG product. The PDF is very well laid out. It is fully bookmarked, which is usually the first thing I check, but it also has a table of contents, which is not only linked, but also does double duty as a die 100 reference table, in case you want to randomly roll some loot. That is clever use of space. Great job on the layout, Leo. This is super clean work. Now, you know what would be really great to help your players keep track of these items? Props and trinkets. Sadly, you cannot hand your players props hand-forged by elves under a full moon for every item, but you can give them these cards, beautifully illustrated by Nairobi, who did all the art for this project. The cards show the item and the rules for it, so there's no risk of forgetting about it or trying to decipher the notes you scrolled in your character sheet last year. And they even come in a little mimic tag box. Isn't that cute? Normally at some point in the video I tell you that I received a review copy of this product, which I did. However, I'm also going ahead and ordering myself a printed copy of the cards. I have not pulled the trigger yet because I want to get some more stuff to make the shipping costs work out, but if you wanted to know what I think about this product, there you go. Okay, so earlier I mentioned the magic item taxonomy introduced in this book. This is important because having cool magic items is useful, but it's how you bring them to the game that will determine how much bang you will get for your buck. Trek splits them up into 4 roles: trophies, gifts, catalysts, and props. Trophies are items that the players want to get, but do not really change the game much once they get them. Take a plain old +1 magic sword. In a die 20 system, that's a 5% increased chance of hitting something, and a +1 damage, which is nice, but really not much in the big picture of things. You hit things before you had it, you hit things after you got it, and after a few levels that +1 really is not going to make much of a difference in numbers. However, if you dangle it in front of the players as a reward, you can still get a lot of mileage out of it. Maybe make them take that quest they weren't going to do otherwise, or go out of their way to look for it in the dangerous caverns of danger, after they heard the bard sing about it. With this kind of treasure, it's the journey, not the destination. My unpopular opinion is that magic items should never have just a plain mechanical bonus. If someone is going to trouble to make a magic item, slightly better stick doesn't seem to be worth the effort. As a plot hook though, this makes a lot of sense, and you can use it for any kind of mechanical reward that the players are into. Gifts are items that let the players bend or break some of the rules of the game. Take Boots of Flight for example. Normally you cannot fly, but because you have this item, you can. Bilbo's ring from The Hobbit is another example. Unlike trophies, gifts do change the way that the players can interact with the game, because they introduce new abilities. You can introduce these randomly with no foreshadowing and still get great mileage out of them, because it gives players new ways to be a problem. New ways to tackle a problem. Catalysts are items that can be used to introduce a plot or provide opportunities for role-playing. An example of this would be Excalibur from Arthurian myth and Bilbo's ring from Lord of the Rings. They're iconic, people will recognize them and possibly set things in motion for or against the player.
Listen, strange women lying in ponds distributing swords is no basis for a system of government.
They can also be lower key. One example from Treasure Trove is the Shrivner Sponge, which gives you a bonus if you think about your past actions while cleansing yourself. And that's a good opportunity to give an insight on your character's inner thoughts. Point is, using a catalyst or carrying one around should have interesting role-playing consequences and side effects. Finally, props are things you introduce mainly for world-building purposes. They don't have to be portable or accessible to the players or even have any practical use. But a great example from this book is the Wand of the Unhappy Alchemist. Why is there a wand that can turn gold into lead and honey into mayonnaise? We might never know, but your players will definitely question that and learn a bit more about your world in the process. There can be a bit of overlap between the categories obviously, but I think this will be useful to plot out where and when and why to introduce items. If you want to find out more, Trek has a whole video about this here, where it is explained in much greater depth. And that's it for today. Be sure to check out Trek's Treasure Trove on DriveThru RPG and I'll see you around. Oh, and if any of my regular players are still watching, no, I am not going to make it rain magic items in our low fantasy games anytime soon. Bye!